Hi everyone, I'm Shelley and you're watching There's No Place Like Home. I'm back with another reading from The Iron Republic by Richard Jameson Morgan, and today we are going to be reading Chapter 9. I have been greatly interested in what you have told me about your government, I said as we rode along. But one thing you did not explain I would like to know, and that is how the lots are cast, which elects one man to office out of the great number of candidates. Now, said my friend, by a fortunate circumstance, you can have an opportunity of seeing just how it is done, as a magistrate has recently resigned in one of the commonwealths of this province to accept a position in the sub-treasury at Aegea in the province of Vandalia. And if you remember, there was an item in the news current this morning which stated that an election would be held tomorrow to fill the vacancy occasioned by the supervisor taking his place. It is only about an hour's run on the Ironia and Olympian Railway, and you can go down and see it for yourself, which will be better than any description you could have of it. It was accordingly arranged that I should run down the next morning and take it in. When we arrived at the house of my friend, I found a gentleman waiting for me with a tape line and a book of cloth samples who was introduced as a very capable furnisher. I learned that my host had asked him to call and take my measure for an outfit. I went up to my room with the outfitter and was surprised at the excellent quality of his samples, there being no shoddy or inferior goods in the lot. I intimated to him that as I had a very complete wardrobe, and as the period of my sojourn in that country was uncertain, I did not desire anything expensive, preferring something rather of good appearance without regard to durability. The smiling tailor told me, though, that he had no goods that would not wear for years, all being equally well made, and the only difference being in the weight of the material. Inspecting a piece of black cashmere, I asked if he could guarantee the dye to retain the luster, and to my astonishment was informed that he did not handle any dyed cloths at all, everything he had being in the natural color of the wool, which included every shade of handsome suitings of the finest and firmest texture. Remarking the excellence of the quality, I volunteered the compliment that his factories evidently turned out better goods than ours, whereupon he informed me that every piece of was woven by hand, and that there was not a cloth factory in the Republic. In the meantime, I had made my selection, and he was engaged in taking my measure. Do you mean to tell me, I asked with astonishment, that a nation so far advanced as yours does not use machinery in the manufacture of cloth? None at all, was the reply. They used to, long before my time, but under the Republic no factories are allowed. And do you weave this cloth, or do you have to go around and find it among the private individuals who weave it? I asked. Oh, I simply go to the government exchange, which takes it from the weavers, and get what I want. Does the government speculate in this cloth or simply store it and sell it for the weavers? The government does not speculate on anything, replied the outfitter. It takes this cloth, giving the weaver in exchange the price established by the Bureau of Subsistence, which is based on the weight and weave of the goods. It is then sold to whoever wants it at a slight advance, which is the seigniorage, or principal source of revenue for the support of the state. Then there is no competition, I remarked. I suppose the prices for the different grades are purely arbitrary with this bureau. No, the price of nothing is arbitrary, returned the tailor, the value of everything being fixed by the average cost of production, as ascertained by the bureau in the most careful and scientific manner. There must be, said I, some unsaleable goods made, as there is in my country. Does the exchange have to take them at the production price, regardless of what they will sell for? The exchange sometimes has goods that will not sell for the established price by reason of their undesirability, damage in storage, or other causes. When that is the case, they are cut to the selling point. It frequently happens, too, especially with agricultural productions, that the price of one article is reduced, while that of other things which compete with it or displace it is raised. The Bureau has all of that in hand, and the business is reduced to a science. The exchange also has the right to reject anything, and so producers keep in touch with it and thus know what the public demand is for. Here was another field opened up to my curiosity, which I would have liked very much to explore by further questioning, but my outfitter did his work expeditiously, and lunch was waiting. At the table, I introduced the subject and asked why the manufacture of cloth by machinery was prohibited in the Iron Republic. We prohibit the use of machinery in the making of cloth, answered my host, for the same reason that we do in the manufacture of everything else that the people can supply without the aid of machinery. That is, that there may be work for all. Do I understand that you have no manufacturers at all? I asked. Not that we have none at all, but none for the manufacture of any article that can be applied on sufficient quantity to meet the demand without the use of machinery. This list includes fabrics of almost every description: shoes, hats, headwear, furniture, rope, agricultural implements and products, vehicles, in fact, almost everything that we use. And the purpose of this is that there may be work for all to do. That is the purpose, replied my host, and the purpose is accomplished, for as it requires the work of all to supply the wants of all, there is no enforced idleness in the Republic. But, said I, with a disposition to argue every point, one man with a machine can do the work of 100, and it seems to me that with your admirable political conditions, you might well employ the use of machinery, thereby giving the people more time for recreation and the improvement of the mind. Certainly there is great temptation to use a machine that will do the work of 100 men, replied my host. And if the 100 men were the beneficiaries of its efficiency, there could be no excuse for not using it. You employ labor-saving machinery in the United States, and where it does the work of 100 or 1,000 men, do they get the benefit of it? I could not say that they did. As a matter of fact, continued my host, does anybody derive any benefit except the owners of the machine? I was obliged to confess that they were the only direct beneficiaries, but that the cost of production was lessened, which of course must be to the advantage of all. Ah, my friend, exclaimed the professor, I very much fear that your argument is influenced by your legal training, for it is palpably one-sided, being predicated on the assumption that a machine doing the work of 100 men lessens the price of its products without diminishing the purchasing power of the 100 men who have been deprived of work by it. Now, let us come down to practical illustration. You use machinery in the manufacture of shoes. To what extent does it lessen labor and cost? Very much indeed, I answered, warming up to the advantage I thought I saw. With improved machinery and a division of labor, I have been informed that a man can make a pair of shoes every 7 minutes at a cost of 30 cents. Very well. If you are not positive, though, as to the accuracy of your data, we will allow some latitude and say they make a pair in 12 minutes at a cost of 50 cents. That will be 50 pairs in a day of 10 hours. Your man with the machine then has done the work of 50 men. What pay does he receive? From the best of my information, an average of about $2 per pay, I replied. Your man is paid $2 a day and turns out a product that sells for $25 in. Oh, no, I interrupted. That costs $25 to make. I see, said my host, smiling. This is the cost of making. Now, what do these shoes sell for? I should say an average of $1.50. Ah, then this man does the work of 50 men and turns out a product that is worth $100 more than the cost of production. Who gets this $100? Asked my host, laying down his fork and looking across the table at me with an air of affected simplicity. The man or company that owns the machine, I suppose, I answered, slightly nettled. Then the 49 men whose work has been done for them do not come in except in the matter of increased time for recreation. But what surprises me most, my host went on, is that these shoes can be made for 50 cents and sold for $1.50. How is this feat so contrary to the laws of competition accomplished? In the first place, I answered, our manufacturers combine to maintain prices among themselves, and in the second place, we have a tariff, which brings the imported article up to that price. So, exclaimed my host, I begin to comprehend your system, which I presume was the same when I left the country. But as I was quite a young man and had never paid much attention to such matters, I retained no knowledge on the subject. Now let us look into this system in its practical application. Here is a machine that in one day, with the application of one man's labor, does the work of 50 men, thereby depriving 49 men of the opportunity to work. In the value of the product, it turns out, it earns the wages of 50 men, and yet all that labor gets out of it is the paltry sum of $2, or not enough to pay for the result of 15 minutes of its time, the balance going to the owner of the machine. So while flesh and blood and brains and skill earns $2 for labor, wood, and iron, and steel earns $50 for capital. And this wonderful machine, too, in all its probability, is the product of skill and labor at the same miserable wage. Is this system conducive to an equitable distribution of wealth among the people? Does it not rather impoverish the 49 men whose work is done by the machine and enrich one man who gets the value of 50 men's work for the price of one? I could not deny so logical a conclusion. Now, in the Iron Republic, continued the professor, where machinery is not allowed to supplant labor, to produce 50 pairs of shoes in one day would probably require the work of 50 men, and the value of their product would be divided among them. So the question resolves itself into this proposition: which is better, to let 50 men earn $1 apiece, or to let 2 men earn $100, one of whom works while the other keeps books? Of which amount the working man gets $2 while the bookkeeper gets the balance. The proposition did not admit of debate, but I could not refrain from remarking that it seemed a pity that 50 men should labor a day to accomplish what an inanimate machine might do without toil or fatigue. Not necessarily, retorted my host. In appearance and according to the ethics of industrial economy, there could be no objection to the machine doing the work of 50 men if the 50 men got the benefit of its work. And yet it is contrary to the divine economy, as expressed in the biblical injunction that man shall eat bread by the sweat of his brow, and like every other human practice that runs contrary to the divine order, is harmful in its results, and I think your system must demonstrate it. Notwithstanding the use of machinery, you doubtless have a large number of men who are steadily and permanently employed. Now, which makes the best showing, mentally and morally, this steadily employed class, or the unemployed or partially employed class whose time for recreation and the improvement of the mind has been increased by the use of machinery? I was compelled to confess that the employed class took precedence both in point of intelligence and morals. I remarked, too, that it was a disappointing fact that our public libraries, night schools, and other institutions founded for the benefit and elevation of the masses were least patronized by those of most leisure. It is not strange, said my host. The reasonable employment of the body prepares the mind for recreation. A man's mind, though, especially if it be not well cultivated, having nothing to do to employ it but recreation, grows bad, just as most boys do who have nothing to do but play. The universe is founded on a plan, and that plan contemplates that every man shall work. The man who does not suffers, and society suffers by him. There are no exceptions to this rule. I confess that you have had the better of me all along, said I. But you are certainly mistaken when you say that there are no exceptions to this rule, for many of our most intelligent and virtuous men are those who have grown vastly rich from the results of other men's labor. I may say most generous also, for in my country hundreds of churches, colleges, libraries, and other beneficent institutions stand as monuments to this virtue in them today. Undoubtedly, assented the professor. And yet, I must remind you in the first place that a man who becomes a millionaire from the increment of other men's labor can be no idler, for the mere keeping up with his business and getting the lions, tigers, and wolves' shares of the product of the labor employed by him will keep him busy. And in the second place, when a man makes gifts with money obtained that way, is such generosity in any manner different from that of Robin Hood, who robbed one class and gave to another? Is it even as commendable? For the old highwayman invariably took from the rich and gave to the poor, at the worst doing evil that good might come by, contributing to the equalization of wealth, while your millionaires take from the poor and give in such a way as to enhance their reputation, this being the only thing to be desired after having acquired more money than they can use in promoting their pleasures. From my point of view, there is no more generosity in such actions than there was in Trajan's lavish expenditure on his tomb. I think you will find, too, that the sons of these millionaires who inherit the money without the training that came with its accumulation will suffer and make society suffer, thus proving the old Bible doctrine that the sins of the parents are visited on the children unto the third and fourth generation. That doctrine may be true in theory, I replied, laughing, but in my country, the first generation usually exhausts the possibility of the evil by getting rid of the root of it. In as far as the money itself may contribute directly to the evil, assented my host, but a life of profligacy and dissipation made possible by inherited wealth may leave a train of evils behind it extending to generations unborn. Then you regard wealth as an evil, do you? I asked. I certainly regard wealth as the most prolific source of evil, and where it is acquired in the manner we have been discussing, that is, where a poor man is required to make shoes for a rich man for 50 cents and then pay $1.50 for the same shoes for himself and family to wear, it is an evil per se. You say this is partly the result of legislation, and if it is, yours is a government of the minority, for there must be fewer rich than poor men. I grant what you say, I replied. Government is of, for, and by the rich, always has been, and probably always will be, because wealth is power. But it does not necessarily follow that for that reason it is bad. In the cooperation of mind and matter in the affairs of human government, as in everything else, mind must predominate. In predominating, it secures the conditions of life most favorable to itself, and thus extend its sphere. As in an exploring party, a few men, by getting more than their share of food, are enabled to penetrate faster and further than their comrades. But as they blaze the way they open up, it is easier for the rest to follow. And so I believe the world has been the gainer by the very inequalities and injustice which you condemn. In its age-long and worldwide advance, the human mind has not marched in a phalanx. Under favoring conditions, the strongest and boldest have broken away and led the advance, scaling walls to others impregnable and climbing heights inaccessible to the average, and placing beacon lights to make the ascent easier for those that follow. My dear sir, exclaimed the professor, your figure is very pretty, but I think it is only because of the beautiful words in which you have clothed it. Skill in the art of dressing may be made to hide many defects, with a sly glance at the ladies. But I am not going to be taken in by a mere external appearance. It is not your figure I find fault with, but your logic. Let us state your proposition in the form of a syllogism, and proceed logically. Major premise. In its advancement, mind will secure to itself the conditions most favorable to its expansion. Minor premise. But wealth is most favorable to the expansion of the mind. Conclusion. It is therefore by the aid of wealth that the human mind has advanced to its present wonderful stage of development. Is this a fair and logical statement of the proposition? I admitted that it was. Very well, then, I dispute your minor premise and deny your conclusion, said my host positively. Wealth is not favorable to the expansion of the mind, and for its wonderful development it acknowledges no financial obligation whatsoever. Under the patronage of wealth, which was to be the gainer by its product, mind has wrought some of its most beautiful creations, and in modern times wealth has supplied in some instances tools to facilitate its work. But in the main, money has rather been the enemy of mind and wealth, whether supporting monarchical extravagance, religious bigotry, or personal vanity, and ambition has tended to suppress rather than promote the highest and noblest qualities of the human mind. Its sublimest efforts have been achieved in poverty, in exile, in dungeons even. And as for scaling walls impregnable and climbing heights inaccessible and planting beacon lights for others, as per your pretty figure, the most gifted men have gone to the stake or scaffold because power, which has always been synonymous with wealth, did not approve. I began to get warm in the collar, for though I had engaged in the discussion more for information than argument, the ease and skill with which my opponent had met and defeated me at every point aroused all of the belligerency of my nature. But what made it more exasperating, too, the ladies seemed to be deeply interested listeners and caught every point. Since you have appealed to Caesar, said I, unto Caesar will we go. If you resort to logic, I will meet you with your own weapon and state another syllogism for you to disprove. Major premise, in all times wealth and power have been used to repress and retard the development of the mind. Minor premise, but it is in the nature of mind to resist oppression, and its mightiest energies have been aroused in this resistance. Conclusion, therefore wealth and power have unwittingly contributed to the development and expansion of the mind. Very neatly turned, cried the professor, while the ladies smiled, and Miss Helen even infringed the neutralities laws by clapping her hands. Then your position, continued my host, is that everything which opposes the advancement of the mind really facilitates its development. Not precisely. Everything which arouses the resistance and overcoming instinct of the mind, I returned. The point is well taken and strongly stated, conceded the professor. But what wealth and power has contributed to the development of the mind by such direct oppression as to arouse resistance and wake its slumbering energies is slight in comparison with the blight and stagnation induced by war, financial oppression, and industrial wrongs. You charge these things to wealth, then? I do, most unqualifiedly, responded my host. Homer would have us believe that the Trojan War was fought for love, but the wars of history have been for wealth and power. I make the point on you, I returned, that the poorest nations have been the least intelligent, and that industrial wrongs have always been greatest where ignorance has been grossest. I think that history will sustain me in the further assertion that war has been the great civilizer of the world. Incontrovertible statements, all, asserted my opponent, and incorrect only as they confuse cause and effect. If the poorest nations have been the least intelligent, they were the poorest because they were the least intelligent, and not unintelligent because they were poor. If industrial wrongs have been greatest where ignorance has been most dense, it is simply because the people, being ignorant, were least able to defend themselves against industrial wrongs. If civilization has been a product of war, it is a byproduct and resulted because, notwithstanding the barbarity and inhumanity of the wars, they brought different peoples together, and the knowledge of different nations, by amalgamation, was enlarged. War itself is debasing to the human mind. I take issue with you on that, I said hotly. War may be destructive, but it is not debasing. War may be cruel, but cruelty calls forth nobility. War may make widows and orphans, but it also makes heroes, and liberty and patriotism have been fructified by all the blood the earth has ever drunk. And what has been the liberty of the world, my friend asked scornfully, but the illusion which people cherish when they have exchanged one set of masters for another? And what is the patriotism of the world, but that savage and senseless prejudice which is cultivated by teaching the fools of nation to hate the fools of other nations? And when the fools of two nations have been set by the ears by their rulers, they fight and maim and kill. And this is called glorious war. I beg a truce, I cried, seeing that my venerable host felt deeply on the subject, while I was merely endeavoring to hold up my end of the argument. I find that I am no match for you iron republicans. I have only encountered these accomplished ladies, yourself and Professor Hallam, and on the subjects of dress, industrial economy, and music, I find that I know nothing. Am eliminated, obliterated. In other words, to use an Americanism, I am not in it, and hereby surrender. Foot, horse, and dragoons. I cannot offer you my sword, for I presume there is no such thing in this model republic. They were all beaten into plowshares long since, answered my friend, smiling good humoredly, so that formality will have to be dispensed with. I am generous, though, in victory, and will pay you the compliment to say that if your cause was worthy of your prowess, the result might be different. In all contests, though, the justice of a cause is not less an element of strength than the greatness of cannon and sharpness of steel. I bowed my acknowledgment of the compliment, and indulged the hope that I might yet find some vulnerable point in the Iron Republic, if for nothing else than to redeem myself in the fair eyes that had witnessed my discomfiture. I think you are entirely too magnanimous in professing defeat, said Miss Morris, taking part in the conversation for the first time, and looking at me with her beautiful eyes beaming with interest. If you are not too proud to accept a humble ally, I bowed again. I venture to suggest that the enemy, smiling and flashing a glance at her father, may attribute his victory, if indeed he has won it, to the fact that the fighting was all in his own territory where he was entrenched. It is my opinion, if I am worthy to be admitted to a council of war, that you run up the white flag too soon. With the glorious prospect such a promising alliance opens up to me, I replied facetiously, but with a peculiar thrill of gratification. I hasten to pull down the flag of defeat and beg that you will advance into the breach. Well, said my fair ally, I reopened the attack by the assertion that it was not alone in bringing the nations into closer intercourse that war has exerted a civilizing and elevating influence on the human mind. I believe that the highest and noblest thoughts of the peaceful present owe their origin to the high and noble deeds of a past made glorious by war. Tut, tut, exclaimed her father. The romances of history and Sir Walter Scott have corrupted your mind. Kindled, rather, retorted my ally with a vigor that proved she was in earnest. I acknowledge my indebtedness to history and Sir Walter, and when I read of the deeds of Richard the Lionheart and Ivanhoe, even of Dalgetty and De Bracy, I cannot abide the goody goodliness of a big nation like this that works and eats and slumbers like an ox. What would be the history of the world today if the Iron Republic had been founded on the Babylonian Empire and its principles had received worldwide acceptances? Try to think of a history of the world without an Alexander or Caesar or Frederick the Great or Bonaparte or Washington, without a Marathon or Thermopylae, without Crusades or Richard the Lionheart. I was surprised at the energy with which these words were uttered, and suspected that the strong feeling that prompted them must have been long repressed. My host looked astonished, and Mrs. Morris turned to her daughter with a glance of concern, as though she had suddenly discovered in her traces of insanity. The history of the world, my dear, said her father, after a moment's silence, we may not alter or amend, and perhaps would not if we could. It is with the world's life as with a man's. The excesses, dissipations, and sins of early years cannot be blotted out, and the experience of them may even serve to enhance the virtues of maturer age. Sometimes such experiences become the foundation of a nobler and more purposeful life, and then they may be recalled without regret. But it is a poor life that does not improve with age, and the world's life will be unrounded and incomplete if it is not profited by the knowledge and experience of the past. It is not in me to controvert these words so seriously and truly spoken, but with my new ally I was in the predicament of the man in the Indian fable, who made an alliance with the tiger, and found, after he had bound himself with thongs to that unconquerable beast, that he could not run away when he would. I trust you will not be angry with me, father, if I seem to dispute with you, replied Miss Helen with unyielding firmness. But can that have been wholly bad in the past, which is the source of all that is most beautiful in the present? What is the inspiration of poetry and all great thoughts, but the high deeds which you impute to the recklessness of the world's youth? War is cruel, but does not its very cruelty provoke nobler sacrifices, as Mr. Barrington has said, and a more exalted heroism than the piping herdsman of Utopia ever dreamed of? And may it not be in the plan of creation that sunshine and storm, tears and laughter, love and hate, war and peace shall alternate like day and night to the end of time? My daughter, answered her father gravely, I am grieved at the low estimation in which you seem to hold your country, and that condition which has been the desire of the ages. But you are entitled to your opinions, and I would not have you repress them in deference to me. It is my faith, though, that the plan of creation contemplates the ultimate elimination of hate and strife and all evil whatsoever. And though he may not appeal to youth and a romantic imagination, the piping herdsman of Utopia, who tends his flocks and lives in peace, with clean hands and an upright heart, is to me a nobler example of God's creation than any medieval swashbuckler that ever drew sword or broke lance to win the silly fancy of a foolish lady love. To my mind, Professor Hallam, who would walk around a block rather than tread upon a worm, is a greater man than Richard the Lionheart ever was, from every intelligent point of view. It may be wrong and wicked, cried the beautiful woman vehemently, with flashing eyes and flushed face. And if it is, I can't help it, and I don't care. But I am tired to death of this dreary monotony of peace and prosperity, and the ring of a spearhead upon a breastplate, or the clash of swords in a glorious cause would make sweeter music for me than all the piping herdsmen of Utopia, or all the fiddlers of Ironia, for that matter. And bursting into tears, she rose hastily from the table and left the room. Well, I'll declare, exclaimed my host, pushing back his chair. Who can solve the female enigma? I could not, but the one under consideration had gratified me exceedingly by her strange conduct, though I could not tell exactly why. It is said that women are past finding out, and I have never been a careful investigator. But without understanding it, the contemptuous reference to the fiddlers of Ironia braced me up immensely. With a woman's penetration, probably, Mrs. Morris saw further into the matter than any of us, and saying something about girls' heads being filled with romance, she left the table also and followed her daughter from the room. The meal had been concluded some time before, and as Miss Morris's unexpected denouement, if the word may be used here, had very naturally put an end to the conversation, my host led the way, and we adjourned to the library. And that is all of chapter 9. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you liked this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed and would like to hear more of what I have to say, I would love if you would do that. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave one down below. And if you like my work and would like to become a channel member, I will leave a link in the description box for my channel membership, or you can just click on it right on my channel page. And I hope you have a great day.